with this group, and Verena's not going to make it today. Her job situation's changed a little bit, so we'll have to see if we can reconfigure at another point for next week. But yeah, the point to always make sure that we pivot is, everyone's favorite and worst word these days, but like there's definitely a whole new thing that um, we haven't we haven't spent any time. And it's a really old thing, but it's a new thing today, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure in your city there's curfews and military and crazy stuff going on for good reason. But what are we? I put out there as the question, like, what have we been doing in our careers to empower youth in the classroom? And that was really how I wanted to try to look at it and see, if there were any things that we might pick up from each other and take a look to see how we might amplify an interesting question or problem that helped us get at giving kids, more of a real sense of their power, not just in the classroom but beyond. Like, to because a lot of times we've already looked at the ways that classroom assignments and activities are just becoming these one and done things, right?
Mhm.
And they don't necessarily translate into any kind of application or transfer. But and that's just like with academic and creative content. But like, what are the other sorts of experiences that teachers can help create for kids in school that give them a real sense of their agency and power, beyond school and in society and as citizens, and to have the critical thought necessary to engage in real dialogue with each other, with anybody, about any topic. So that was sort of how I framed it on an opening, on the Twitter um, post about
Cool.
today. But if you wanted to bend that towards something that suits you, I'm interested in that as well.
Well, I'm wondering, and let me know, but I was wondering if I can share some images with you guys, if you'd allow me to do some sharing. Just because I thought,
Sure.
like, the press has come out with some pictures of what school's going to look like in the fall. And I thought that might help to frame this discussion that we have today without work.
Yeah, I suppose it could. I
Yeah,
mean, like,
okay. I'm game.
yeah, I'll make it so you can share, and then we'll just go from there. Because I always want to make it make the group ours, so it's not just me. I'm just your
Okay.
ringleader, I suppose.
So do you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Um, there's a bunch of schools, like the press just this week released a bunch of images of what school is going to look like in the fall. And these are schools that have already opened up. You can see, like, this school in Quebec, they've already started using the green dots for social distancing
Yep.
measures. You can see a face shield for the teacher. That's going to be
Yep.
pretty typical of what you should expect in the fall. In addition, the whole experience of taking a bus is going to change dramatically, right? So, I mean, just like you need to have PPE while you're on the bus. The bus driver, may have some kind of guard of some sort, just to reduce the opportunities of transmission. And the bus driver will also be wearing PPE, is the expectation. Further to
Hmm.
that, you think of like any elementary school, social distancing measures means like every second seat, at least on a round table, is being used, and you see they're adding tape and stuff in this location to line up kids, and that's going to be pretty typical of what you're going to see in the fall. This is a school in Nice, in France.
France.
Hmm.
Starting off, some of the first physical activities that most kids are going to be involved with is likely going to be some kind of social distancing activities. So they're like holding their arms out to measure distance, know that like they're maintaining proper distance, especially when playing in the
Hmm.
playgrounds, which will be an important activity. Some schools, this one in Brussels in Belgium, has already started to use like little dots. So you see there's white dots, and each person stands on a white dot in order to talk to their peers. And so it allows them to maintain social distance, but it doesn't essentially, like, even
Hmm.
talking to people is going to be very different than before. You can see each person has face masks, hands in pockets. It's going to be really hard to see what people are feeling, and what they're thinking just through these masks. So
Hmm.
you can imagine. And this is probably one of the bigger ones. You'll see in this particular image, there's a child in the left that does not have PPE, and there's a child in the middle who does have PPE. So there are going to be parents who are going to flat out refuse to use any PPE for their child. They will decline it, and so it will be a question of policy for teachers, for
Yeah.
school districts, administration, of what are you going to do then? Are you going to tell them to go home, or are you
Right.
going to allow them to go into school without the PPE? In which case, these are like the high risk individuals, and so they're going to have to decide. And this is in Brussels, but everywhere in the world is going to have this same issue. In addition, many schools are using temperature readings for entry, so above a certain threshold, and they can't go in.
Right.
PPE it seems to be required in many countries. And in addition, many schools also have hand sanitizers when you enter, so you get your hand sanitized like immediately starting when you enter school, just to reduce. Some schools have gone a little bit further. So this particular school in Daejeon, South Korea, uses an additional plastic shield in between students to kind of reduce the opportunities for transmission. I have seen other schools which use like
Well,
one
they're not
row.
6 feet apart.
No, they're not. And how are you going to do
So
that
how
in
do
South
they
Korea?
exit or enter?
That's the thing, is you don't, right? Like you still take that risk. You can't have, like, essentially they're using PPE to reduce the requirements around social distancing. Because if
But
you
they're
don't
not
have
entering and
PPE,
exiting at a distance, though, right? In
oh, do
this
you want to see
picture,
how they enter and exit? I'll show you.
I'm just saying, like, I'm just imagining that how they enter and exit into a classroom into that one, or where they're
Yeah.
you're never gonna be outside of the 6 feet. You'll be within the 6 feet.
Correct.
These
The
guys aren't
rules are a
six
little
feet
bit
across.
different in South Korea than they are, say, in America. It's not 6 feet distance. In South Korea, it's a little bit less because of the requirement for PPE. Here in South Korea, you can see red dots indicating where
Yeah.
each student is supposed to stand. And there's two different rows. So there's a kind of going up and a going down row. And so depending on which
Yeah.
side you're in, there is kind of a little bit of queuing and a little bit of lineups in those schools as well. So yeah, you're
I
right.
heard
Like,
that a number of schools closed in South Korea.
yes,
That they opened and closed already. A number of them.
the same in France as well.
Hmm.
Right? And so this is the thing that I have the most trouble with, is many ministries and many places, like this is the example of how they eat lunch. So when you eat lunch, you have to take off the PPE, right? And so what does that mean?
Right.
It likely means a solid barrier. So you're no longer eating lunch at the table with your friends. You're likely eating it kind of on your own, like kind of isolated, at least on all corners from other people. That's going to be more typical of what you should expect. And you're right. Like what you said about closures is exactly right, because let's be honest, like the moment you have any school opening, you're going to have an outbreak, right? Like in France, they had 70 cases of positive like COVID-19 days after reopening.
Right.
And this is not like every one of those people who was
Right.
infected, they didn't just close down the classroom. They closed down the entire school.
Right. You have to.
And so this is why I have a problem where people are saying, "Oh, we're just going to go back to normal." That is a
Right.
complete impossibility right now. The moment you reopen
Yeah.
schools, there will be outbreaks. You must close. You will have to close a large number of your schools on an instant. And so we need to get used to this notion of one day you're going to be in class and the next day you're going to be learning from home, because that is the reality for so many
Or you just don't open
kids.
the school. Or you just don't open it. I
Exactly.
mean,
Exactly.
like, and then, like, it's interesting. Like, how do you think, Ed? What do you think in terms of just like because I'm sure there are probably a lot of ways to go with this, but and I don't really have an answer. So this is just sort of a question that's occurring to me now. How do you think all of this is going to play into different problems that we're already having with, the equity in schools and, um, curriculum that's Eurocentric and what do you think? Like, how do you think the way that we deal with this coronavirus and trying to open school will either, reify things that we're already struggling with or create new issues that we haven't thought of with regards to just, really specifically looking at, like the ways that as I'm trying to frame today's talk, because this is really good and I think it's helpful. But if you frame it within the idea of like, giving kids a chance to feel like they have a say in what happens in their lives
Yeah.
and in
Yeah.
their neighborhoods,
Well,
how
well,
does this
Brian,
play into that?
I mean, it's a great point, Brian, because that kind of relates to the other extreme, right? So the
Hmm.
other extreme of going all online, like only
Yeah.
online school, I
Right.
feel is also a complete impossibility as well,
Hmm.
because we already know that there's a huge percentage of students that are completely absent from all online systems right now. They are not participating at all in school. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, but
And my,
hey, Daniel.
I guess my main message is that really a blended approach used to be kind of like a nice to have if you
Hmm.
were able to do kind of a little bit online so that they could do some stuff at home and you could do a portion of it at the school, that would be fine, but there's no expectation that you would do anything at home. That's going from being a nice to have to being a requirement. Like that's the only way you're going to be able to learn in the event that your school gets closed. And to me, like one of the most interesting things is what's going to happen with respect to assessment and testing.
Hmm.
So if you are, suddenly doing these tests that require a closed environment, such as a gymnasium, like a large hall or a classroom, it is going to be very difficult in the event that everybody has to be at home all of a sudden. They have Google. They have,
Right.
texting to each other. They have a lot of resources that they can use
Right.
towards the exams. And that's going to have a big, big impact on schools as a whole. And I find that to me is quite interesting, is this notion of
Hmm.
like we'll need to rethink assessment. And once we rethink assessment, we'll have to rethink everything else. Right. And so like I do hope that and this is where I get at is at the end of the day, it's really what are the things that are going to go with the student from school to home? It's going to be what are they interested in? That's not going to change, right? What is their like attitudes, their motivations, those values that they have? Those all go with the student. Everything else in their environment is going to be different. But if you can really capture their interests, and this is potentially where I'm getting at, is we need to revisit. We need to revisit student interest. We need to treat it with a new level of seriousness because really, let's be honest, like we're no longer competing with other distracted students in the classroom. Like you're competing with Netflix, you're competing with video games, you're
Right.
competing with like all the stuff that is on YouTube,
Hmm.
and you're not going to win if you're trying to fight it. Like there's just no chance.
Right.
And so you have to be complementary to the interest that students already have. You cannot fight that. You can't fight this. If you fight this, you're going to lose. So, like, we have an opportunity in education to go to revisit. Okay, I like whatever the curriculum is has to
Hmm.
align to whatever their interests are. Find out what their interests are. Maybe at the beginning of the year, do like different polls, activities, etc. Learn as much as you can in the time that you have together, because that's all that you're going to depend on when they're working at home to motivate them. You can't force them to do
Well,
anything. They're going to have to
for
want to.
me, it's you're describing a brave new world, and all I can think about is my nephew and his son. that are struggling with this whole experience. Now he's an average kid who's not motivated by the stuff the teachers are sending home. And I can't imagine him getting motivated if he has to go to be home all the time. So, you know, what I observe around me, and these are obviously adults, and mostly elderly adults, is they're very casual about this kind of, you know, this distancing stuff, because they know the people that they're with. And I think families are starting to group together without separating as much. I mean, everybody's aware of it and they're conscious of it and they're trying, but people are starting to invite people over and they're starting to mix. And I think this is going to carry over into the schools, that there's going to be more mixing, because it's almost intolerable what we're describing here, to have this kind of regimentation in the schools. It's going to be great at first, but if we're going to close down every time a kid gets sick, that's terrible. And with this, it's like a no-win situation. It's not going to work that well at home, and it's not going to work that well in school. So, and this hope that kids are going to be self-motivated is just not realistic. Schools do help a lot of kids stay motivated by their—
Get in there, Jeff.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi. Good to be here. Love your hat. One of the things that that just I was thinking about right now is that we're sort of in the middle of the experiment right now, where kids are at home, and I totally agree with you that not every kid is motivated. I did a little bit of number crunching, and I've got about 40% participation in my class, and that's with parents. And when I contact the parents and they're talking about it, they're at home and they're on top of them. And so I'll say something to the parent, and I'll say, you know, this is great that they're really motivated, and quite often I'll get the response of, well, their motivation comes from me because I'm cracking the whip and I'm telling them to do this. Now in September, that's not going to be the case, because it's going to be more parents are going to be absent. They're going to be away, and so this bit about families getting together, I think that you might get the same thing where you have groups of students that are getting together, and that they're doing the work. So there's that to deal with. To your point about the assessment, one of the things that I was always considering when I was doing any kind of testing is that if your test can be, if you're given a test in school and the kid can pass it because they have access to Google, it's a bad test. So I've always designed my tests so that it gives the kids an option to be able to prove something. So if you think about the Q chart, or the chart of questions, and your low-level questions like what is this and who is this, and those low-level questions, they're not as valuable as you know, how is this important, or why is this important? Those kind of questions are going to become more important as we do assessment. Now, right now, I'm doing an online course. I'm teaching something called e-learning. And so as I'm doing that, that's one of the most popular questions is, how do you stop cheating? And so it's going to become really important, because I really do think that we're going to be doing more of the blended learning, more of the, hey, let's check in now, and now you're going to go away, and then you're going to come back. And I think that this idea of having tests in a big gym, I think that's gone. Like, I don't think we'll ever see that again.
Yeah, you know, the greatest stuff that I've ever done with kids in the classroom is because we were all there, and you know, just having that dynamic, you know, be something that I encourage and nurture and help to you have them take over the room essentially, and be the thing that's happening in school, right? Like that just, you can't do that with all these dividers and, hour and a half or 2 hour line to get into to school. Have you read about this? I have a colleague who's Korean, and she was talking to some teachers in Korea about this, and the hour and a half line to get into the building. I mean, it's not a very good use of time, and it's extremely stressful. Um, so I'm really just struck by the impossibilities that we're trying to. I don't get it. I don't get it. And and the things that like, and just I want to try to tie it back to looking at, where are the things that we've done well that really give that power and agency to the kids, and like, and how can we retool them to happen in a different way, since we really cannot count on there being the 100% we're at school. We can't count on that, but we know we've all done great stuff when that happened. So how can we learn from those things that we helped to create as educators, for doing this for all these years? Like, how can we use our minds to then refocus and retool really great ideas to perhaps be, experimented with and piloted in a new manner? Hey, Joe.
Well, I was thinking that just as a media literacy teacher, one of the things that you do is you try to take advantage of any medium that you're using. So for example, if you're writing an essay and then you're doing a PowerPoint presentation, you shouldn't take the essay and just drop it into PowerPoint, because then you're missing the whole advantage of using a slideshow presentation. So what are the advantages of having a digital platform? And I think that what you were talking about was involving people and getting them to work together, but it's also about celebration. So how do you celebrate? How do you water the flowers? How do you give them a platform to share the things they're doing? So video is good, but it can't be the only thing that you do, because there are some people who don't want to be on video. And there are some people who don't want to shine that way, but there has to be some sort of feedback. There has to be recognition. You do the work, I'm going to recognize you, I'm going to make it personal. And so if we can leverage the digital tools, I think that we have an opportunity to make it more meaningful for the students, because in the end, it's not about me, it's about what they do, right? So
Right. Get in there,
Jeff, I think
Daniel.
you raised. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
I thought you raised a good point, Jeff, and I just wanted to like expand on that. Like, you know, just straight up doing like running through the slides or whatever isn't really going to be that productive. But if we like, what I really like is the EduProtocols approach, where it's kind of this notion of like quiz first, find out what they don't know, and then actually teach them some stuff, and then like do a kind of quiz in the end, so you actually have some level of understanding. And to that end, like I've been doing some experiments with my kids. I remember like earlier, Eeyore was mentioning about like his nieces, like just what's motivating them, and it reminded me of my kids as well, that when they started, man, they had no interest whatsoever in participating in any of the activities from school, any of the packets, any of the materials from school. But they were really interested in pirates. They were really interested in ninjas. And so I had to like rework everything. So I like think about like, how can I relate whatever I'm doing to pirates and to ninjas? And it turns out there's quite a few things that you can relate. Like you can relate navigation. They're very resourceful pirates. You learn about going deep about what a pirate is. So we'll watch movies about pirates, we'll do like pirate dances, we'll sing pirate songs. We will explore this in a lot of depth so that they can be creative. And one of the things that's nice about this is when this is all done, I'm hoping that they don't just remember that they liked pirates, but they remember that they found it really interesting and engaging because they could go deep. And if they ever want to go deep in any particular, like you have to go deep if you want to be creative in that field. So you say you're interested in this, show me that you're interested in it by connecting whatever your interest is to the taught curriculum. And I think, yes, this is going to need some guidance. I used to kind of question about, like Sugata Mitra has his approach of he calls it like learning at the edge of chaos, where you basically have a small group of students. We were talking earlier about the family together, and I love how this connects with that. Basically, they're saying you have a small group of students, you have like stuff that's shown, like instructional materials, and you have really tough questions that no one student could answer on their own. So instead of asking, like, which of the following are causes of global warming, A, B, C, or D, and then E is all of the above, you would ask the question of, well, what causes global warming and how can it be prevented? And having tough questions forces the students to go and work with each other, to ask questions, to be more engaged. And this is the biggest pain point that I see right now of online learning altogether, is that everybody's on their own with like little tasks that they believe that they should be able to do on their own. And so as a result, nobody asks questions, right? Nobody, if they don't do it, they're just like, oh, it's because I'm stupid, and I don't really understand this. So they give up really quickly. And so having really tough questions that require them to work with others, and what he describes is not the knowledgeable teacher being around, but like a granny with, like, they call it the granny coach, with no subject knowledge whatsoever. All they say is, I don't know, like, why don't you keep going?
Yeah, the encouragement.
And preventing you from getting distracted too, right? Like they're saying like, that doesn't seem related to what we're doing right now. We should go back. And it gives them that extra boost of motivation that they wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah.
Without that, like, I just don't see students having enough like built up, resilience and self-regulation to maintain it.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think what you're saying, Ed, that's actually, sorry to cut you off. I just think it's actually interesting because we probably need to have what you're describing in some sort of real way rolled out, as like, this is a way to retool, what happens when you teach a curriculum. Because not every teacher or every principal or every district is going to say, this is the moment where we say, no more curriculum, right? That's probably going to be less frequent. And it's already, pretty uncommon to find a school that is just all kid interest based, right? And so we do need I think what you're describing is a pretty practical way to say, okay, you're probably not going to get rid of your curriculum. So why don't you try doing it like this instead of just counting on all the things that you're used to doing in school actually working, just like, but I do think it'd be great to also try to amplify, well, what about the people who want to use this as the chance to rethink and remake school completely and stop doing curriculum and do something else.
I just wanted to comment on the relationship of my nephew's son and my nephew, is that they had a wonderful experience. When he was going to school, he'd come home, do the usual routines, and then they would bond together. They either would read, they would explore things, because he was interested in all sorts of topics, and he would dive very deeply into these topics. This kid is 8, going to be 9 this year. So he's a young kid, and he's got a lot of interest. But what's happened is that the quality time has gone down because the father is stuck in the fact that he's got to cover this curriculum with him. And he's almost become the bad guy in a sense. And he says it's hurt the other relationships that he's having, because now the child almost doesn't trust his father, that he will allow him to go to that because, well, you have to do this, and the stuff is not interesting because most of the curriculums are not interesting. They're not designed for kids. They're designed for adults who are going to review the materials. Okay, this works in the math area. I always dreamed about mathematics being taught like a story, where there's protagonists, there's people around doing various kinds of things, and kids are engaged in the story. And then you get the stuff in that they need to know, but God help anybody agreeing to that sort of story-based curriculum, because that's not math, and that's the biggest problem. So
If I could
I
jump
love
in,
that.
Get in there,
Yeah.
Daniel.
Go for it.
thanks for having me back again. Talking about the engaged student, I'm glad my kids are both grown up now, because my son fits that description 100% of just totally uninterested in what these teachers were teaching. And yet he had his own interest in the things that he was interested in that he pursued at home. I posted a couple of questions about complexity. I mean, while we're talking, we need to be thinking little kids versus older kids, in terms of how is this going to play out for kids in first, second, third, fourth grade, and when we talk about motivation and learning versus kids in high school, maybe college, where there's a different level, hopefully, of motivation. So that spectrum requires conversations specific to an age group up and down the line. The second part of this is access. Kids in poor neighborhoods just don't have the same digital access in many cases as kids in other circumstances do. And so as we're talking about how we deal with classroom, non-classroom, that piece of the conversation always has to be included someplace, because those kids without are just going to fall further and further behind. I think that of the potentials, I think we'll see more like the one-room schoolhouse, neighborhood-based group learning, if you will. That might be one parent who's at home who takes on the role of the teacher mentor to kids of different age groups, using the internet to support that. Might even involve older kids, peer mentor tutoring younger kids. So that becomes going back 100 years, if you will, to borrow a model that worked for a long time that might be necessary if we can't get people back into the classrooms the way we have done in the past. Just my 25 cents.
Yeah, that's actually a good thought too, and is to look at what happens when we just little groups of people self-organize, and what can I mean, everyone has the legal right to sign the papers to become well, my kids can be homeschooled, right? Like that's already a mechanism in place. I wonder how many people are going to create their own neighborhood homeschools, micro schools. I think that would be incredibly interesting, and I hope it does happen, actually, because it's probably going to be a lot more engaging than all these worksheets anyway. Like because Ed, when you asked the question, you're like, your opening, like just kind of like your quick little overview of like, ask the kids what they don't know. In my head, I was like, I know nothing. I don't know anything. Right? Like that would be me in your class. Like, what are you talking about? Why am I sitting here? What is the point of this? So it's a funny. So like clearly the traditional model didn't really hit very well for me. I mean, I learned a bunch of stuff, but like I didn't. There are things I could point to, but like as an experience, there are lots of ways that my time could have been better used, and I don't know. So, but let's keep going.
One of the things I love about what you mentioned earlier, Brian, is that like this is the nice thing about like catching their interest is they never ask why, right? Because they know why. Like they're interested in what they're interested in, and you don't have to explain it. Whereas with the curriculum, you always have to explain it. You're like, oh, like when am I ever going to use this in my life? It's like it doesn't even matter necessarily what they cover. It's always going to be like in conflict. Like the key challenge right now is things are in conflict. And Daniel, I think you raised some really good points there. Like the first one, I want to go backwards. Like first about like the devices. No, no. Let's start with the different ages. So I love the different ages stuff, and the reason for that is like I live that as well. So I have a 6-year-old son who's in grade 1, and then I have a 4-year-old. His in preschool, and very different age, very different abilities, very different capabilities, but common interests. They both like the same things. They both like pirates. They both like ninjas. And so, yes, the kinds of activities that they're going to have to do has to be age appropriate. It has to be to their level. But when it comes to learning and the stuff that I'm teaching, we can start looking at maybe there's a few things that can cover a couple different ages. Like all my cousins are all about the same age as well. So I can effectively teach like all of them within that age group fairly effectively. And so it just makes me think, maybe there is some stuff that is useful here. Maybe there is some stuff that is that will work across the different ages and different grades. But we have to look at, this is the nice thing about big projects, right? If it's a big, difficult problem for everybody to solve, you do the part that you're capable of doing. And then the other person will do a much, much smaller part that they're capable of doing, but everybody is still contributing to the whole of in some way. And then they all see the result. And the result is shared with, the grandparents, or it's shared with, people who will give them positive encouragement. And I found that that's like working on a bit, like a piece of it, that you're able to work on tends to work really well, as long as you have somebody who's like guiding and facilitating, not knowledgeable about the subject matter, just willing to help them like persist. The other part about devices and access, I agree, like absolutely. We do know that like device access and internet access is a real problem among especially there's like a hierarchy, right? So if you're a household, usually dad gets the device with internet first, then mom, and then the oldest son, and then the daughters. And so in many places they'll choose like, son has the device and he's going to do his education, and the daughter like, you're kind of on your own. And so like some ministers of education have referred to this as digital segregation, because it has all the same race and like the connotations of like race and gender inequality, because that's really what's happening here at scale. But that said, just giving a device to everyone doesn't seem to create the results that we're looking for. If that was the case, then MOOCs, OLPC, like those would have already taken off. They would have already transformed education. But they haven't, because when you have a laptop or you have a device, there are other things that you can do besides school, right? Like you could go and check out your Netflix, or you go check out a website, or you go like check out something else. Like it's very easy to get distracted. So you need a lot more than the devices, and you need a lot more than the internet.
Thanks, Ed. Joe, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, that in part made my contribution a lot more difficult.
Sorry about that.
This is one of the fundamental problems that I see with individualizing education, is that we get into the meritocracy kind of thing again. And so you've got kids that are motivated versus kids that aren't. And how do we get the kids that aren't motivated to be acceptably educated and so forth? But that's not what I wanted to talk about. Before that, I believe you were mentioning some things about curriculum and learning and so forth. And one of the things that keeps coming back to mind, especially like with 4th graders and 6th graders, if we believe that anything that can be Googled doesn't have to necessarily be taught. In other words, when we did the Playmaker School, one of our guidelines we used as to what we covered was, can this be Googled? And so like, how tall is the tallest pyramid? That is a great example of something that does not have to be in the curriculum. And a lot of these, when did the Persian Empire exist? And those kinds of things don't don't need to be a part of the curriculum. But what did need to be the part of the quote unquote curriculum, if we believe that, were the tools necessary to find those things and to understand those things. And so we had no problem with, in your case, a fourth grader and a sixth grader actually using the same content, because to us, the content was not the curriculum. The content was just a means of getting at critical thinking, using comparison, making observations. And so the fact that my grandson is similar to in age to yours, mine is interested in dinosaurs. And so there's really, we got stuck somehow on everybody has to be on the same topic. And we can, if we change the meaning of topic to the learning skill, or the thing that we want the kids to learn being more of this hierarchical thing of how to think, how to reason, how to create meaning, those kinds of things, it really doesn't matter what the curriculum is or what the topic is. It matters how we cleverly help the kids identify how to do these particular things. Like we had 4 learning problem solving strategies. And so our whole curriculum, what we talked about in the school, were these 4 learning strategies. So we didn't have history, English, math. We had problems that came up. Like they were playing, I think I mentioned the game they were playing about Egypt, and the problem came up of how do you do rules? And they had to, they came up with the idea that they needed to write. Well, in needing to write, you need to know what's good writing. And so they created the need to write. And in that creation of the need to write, all of a sudden writing was relevant. It wasn't something that was imposed.
Yeah.
That's like, I'm struggling a lot with the Wildwood Institute for STEM research and development. The kids are supposed to write. And what I'm finding is that they associate writing with an assignment. If there's no assignment, they don't even think about writing. They have no clue that they're supposed to write. And so we started an activity where they spend a day working on whatever they're doing, learning whatever it is that they're learning. And then they need to stop and pause the last 10 minutes and come up with a topic. And then they need to write a paragraph about that topic. And then at the end of that paragraph, that topic should be what I know about this, what I don't know about this, and what I'd like to know about this. And then at the end, they can determine, I'm not really interested in this. And what we mean by interest doesn't just mean that I like this or I'm interested, but it has to, it has no value to our group. It's not interesting and it has no value. Because if it has value, it may not be interesting, but I should do it because it has value. And so getting that mindset is really difficult because school has so indoctrinated. You only write when there is an assignment. Why would I write? And so getting them to recognize that writing is an essential part of letting people know what it is you're learning and discovering. And then that goes to the idea that they should have a mindset that they are in fact learning and discovering and not just being told stuff that is, so that is kind of a wordy answer to some of the things that were.
No, that's good, Joe. I mean, like I this is where I keep coming back to, like, okay, like, I could point to numerous places where I've been involved in stuff with kids just because we all just sat in a room together and said, you know what, why don't we, and then, and then it just takes shape and then we go somewhere with it. Like, so, and some of those big things were, make a radio station, or why don't we put on a theater performance, or why don't we make a concert, like, or why don't we have why don't we do a reading? Why don't we put on it was always about, let's create something that has nothing to do with sitting down for an exam or submitting something to me so that I could mark it up and send it back. It was always about the kids wanting to put themselves in front of other kids and their family members and strangers to show off stuff that they were proud of. And like, they wanted to work hard towards that. And then when it was done, it was like actually kind of a letdown because they wanted more. They wanted to keep like, wait, we did that. What else could we do? Right? Like there's really no end. And so school hardly makes space for that and hardly encourages that as an institution. It's always about people, like working together and, having leadership who says, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Go ahead and do that, Brian. Like, I'm sure the kids are going to love it. Let me know how it goes. And like those kinds of negotiations that happen within schools are, I don't know how frequent it does happen, but when it does happen, it's extremely powerful and gives kids what I'm trying to keep advocating for, and I know all of you do as well, like to give them that power, to give them what we, just by placing them in school, we sort of automatically can devalue their voice and the fact that they actually know a lot of things and are interesting people to talk to and have ideas about what they want to make. And I hate that we just put them in rows and hand them a textbook and say there's a test every Friday. It's just ridiculous. So like, and then adding in all, like, so that's the backstory for however many decades you want to go back, and then add in now. Well, now what, right? Add in all the now what's that you would like to apply given where we are, in June 2020, and then what does it look like to work with kids, and what are we doing with them, right? I'm still there, and like as we're coming up on an hour here, almost, like I'm still looking for us to maybe pitch some ideas about what has really been powerful experiences that don't end, that kids go return to year after year, or think about when they graduate and email you and say, hey, are you still doing that great whatever. That's what I'd like to try to have us point towards. Jeff, you got something?
I was going to add that, like, I'd love to hear what strategies Gary used to, stop some of the crying and yelling at his place related to school.
I don't have a great answer. That was just an observation.
He's
And
being
it's part
chased
of,
by dinosaurs.
and it's part of a larger question, I think, about when we return to whatever we return to, is whether we want to continue ceding the level of authority and agency and power to schools that we've handed over the last few generations. That school is about, that a kid could be suspended from school for doing something in their bedroom. So there's a surveillance and a police aspect to it. If you ask school leaders, their number one concerns when the quarantine started were being fast food workers and childminders. Maybe it's time to revisit the notion of it takes a village to raise a child. And the entire village has abdicated its responsibility and just left it on the doorstep of school. And then I just think some practical stuff. Every kid needs a laptop, period. Every kid needs net access, period. Every kid needs an email address, period. Text is great. One of the best parts about the internet is communicating via text, because it's deliberate, because you can think
Right.
about what you say, you can edit it before you hit return. It could be full. It could be verbose. It gives kids practice with ideas, and yet we jump to all these high-end expensive solutions, and we make a huge mistake in the ed tech community when we're constantly saying, well, I read in the New York Times that the kids no longer tweet, they plurk, and they no longer plurk, they zwonk, and they no longer zwonk, they thwack. And if we miss out on the fact that email is different, email is correspondence, and it would be a terrible idea if we eliminated correspondence from the educational experience or from our culture. And I think it's one of those things that kids remember for the rest of their lives is stuffing a letter in a cardboard shoebox with another kid's name on it. right? That you can
Right.
simulate. I wrote about this 20 plus years ago. You could simulate intimacy online through frequency and volume by continuous exchanging of ideas. You know, that in
Right.
some ways that's more social than the classroom, where you know talking in class is the number one sanctioned activity because it's disruptive. But there's nothing disruptive about any number of us having a back channel conversation while we are participating in this discussion. In fact, there's not only anecdotal experience, but there's research to suggest that those discussions tend to be more work related, less social. I just, every kid needs an email address. Every kid needs web space somewhere, and the school doesn't have to provide that. I mean, we're looking at 300. The current number is 300,000 layoffs.
Wow.
300,000.
Is that public and private?
I think public. I think that's the public number.
Like in California or in your
No,
state?
the United States. 300,000. There might be 300,000
low.
teachers laid off next year. You're right. Okay, so it's low. So what's going to go?
Extracurriculars.
Yeah, all the stuff that matters, all the stuff that keeps school viable.
Right.
The $300,000 a 4 elementary school district spends to take attendance every year isn't going to go, when they could use index cards for that. So one of the things I've been suggesting to people is get a copy of your local budget, either where you teach or where your kids attend.
Right.
Read it and have yourself ready with a proposal for 10% cuts, 20% cuts, 30% cuts, so that when the district reacts in haste, you have an alternative proposal for them. I don't know, and just sort of personal calisthenics stuff. Imagine school without tests or quizzes.
Right.
And I'm not talking good tests and quizzes and bad tests and quizzes, all tests and quizzes. And it seems to be like the least imaginative notion. And we've actually seen, schools threw that stuff out the window immediately when they had to go into quarantine. All of a sudden, the stuff they built everything on didn't matter. And yet now all we hear about is rebuilding the system backwards from assessment. One of the most disappointing things I heard was schools with big IB and AP programs had 11th and 12th grade teachers all kinds of pissed off because they had to teach the last 3 months of the school year, when in the past they just told the kids cram.
Right.
That's kind of, and that was overprivileged schools, where folks were, where folks were in those positions that they cherished because, from about February on, they could just tell the kids study.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, and I typed this in the chat. I mean, I hate to sound like Debbie Downer, but I'm watching my colleagues.
No, you're not.
I'm watching my colleagues in Australia. There's every chance that the scenario in September is teachers are just cannon fodder. They're disposable. Nothing will change.
I know.
There'll be nothing done to mitigate the virus, because there might not be anything to do short of staying home, right? That might be the only thing that mitigates the virus. So any face-to-face activity may just be, oh, you lazy, oh, you poor, oh, you teachers don't care about us, or you whatever. You could write the rest of the insult that's going to be, and the teachers, heartstrings will be tugged on, and there'll be sacrificial lambs, while simultaneously there will be no shortage of expensive junk being purchased by districts to create little cells around children without any
I can understand that there are a number of broader systemic issues related to education that still need to be resolved, but a lot of that doesn't specifically answer the question I had earlier, which was, what have you done that has worked for you and your kids for learning at home?
I'll give you the practical one.
Okay.
I'll give
cool.
you the one practical one. It's a piece of practical advice that I've given to dozens and dozens of colleagues and friends, and they've all had the exact same experience. When the homework became overwhelming and preposterous, and clearly not rooted in any kind of desire for kids to understand anything, we wrote a letter to the teacher saying that, you know, perhaps you're aware that there's no research whatsoever supporting the use of homework. But even if you're not, we are. And we find that the homework being given to Vivian each night is excessive. It's interfering with her ability to practice the clarinet or watch television or play with her brother and sister. It's creating division in our household, and we need to make it stop. And so what we propose to do is we will look at the homework you assign, and once Vivian demonstrates an understanding of the concepts in that homework, we will sign it incomplete, send it back to school, and we do not expect decisions of her parents to be used in any way, shape, or form to harm our child. And in every single instance, the teacher went, yeah, okay. You know, I mean, those aren't the exact words, but something to that effect. And we just said, you know, if
That's pretty
if
good.
she's got 150 arithmetic problems and they're all identical, and she shows us she could do one, we're signing it and sending it back incomplete. But there's this, but we also, you know, we talk about the power imbalance. You hear parents say all the time, but they'll take it out on my kid, which is perhaps the saddest indictment of formal education. The notion that teachers would harm a child because of some decision that their parent made. Like I said, in my experience, not only doing it with 3 kids, but advising lots of other people to try it when they were at wit's end, is that the teachers have never even questioned why or how they do it. And if they have, they're grateful that someone put their hand up and said, yeah, I'm drawing the line here. We're not participating in this anymore.
That's not bad. Hey, Jeff, you wanted to jump in there, Jeffrey?
Oh, I have so many things. Let me go back to the notes. We'll start off with Gary. Totally agree with you on the homework, and whether we're in this position or not, that should be the case. So that if a kid can do, you know, don't give them 100 questions, give them, you know, a bunch. And then if they can't do it, then you refocus and you give them the opportunity to be able to do that. So that's, you know, that doesn't change there. You were talking about every kid should get an email and web space. Just to let you know, that happens in Ontario. They're giving it, certainly with the top 10 boards that I know of, and I'm in the largest one in Canada. Every kid gets an email all the way from kindergarten all the way up to grade 12. They all get web space. You were also talking about Australia and you know, some people getting canned. Didn't that just happen in Massachusetts, where they fired all the arts gyms and music?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah.
It's just like, so we hear this in Ontario and we think, wow. So it's because I think that next year it's going to be really important for everybody to have the arts, because, you know, it's going to help to heal. The thing that Joe was talking about, just using questions, one of the first things that came to mind was that there is a little bit of value in asking stuff on Google, where you say, you know, what's the largest pyramid or something like that, because that's a measurable thing. It just shouldn't be the entire assignment. It should be just like the first, in the same way that when you're teaching a lesson, you know, you shouldn't go on for half an hour, you talk for 5 minutes and then you get them to work. This can be sort of the introduction where
what can kids do? Yeah, I mean, you just have to ask, what can they do?
Yeah, yeah. But I think the reason that that you go on and give them a question like that is to have something that's quick and measurable and say, okay, can we find this? And then we move on. But then there are a whole bunch of other things. But Brian was also talking about what projects can we do that they keep on coming back to. If I can share my screen, I can show you a project that I give for my kids to do, and it's had some.
There you go. You can do it now.
Good responses. So can I share my screen?
Yeah, hit it.
Okay. All right. So share my screen. What am I doing? Desktop. Probably that. Sorry, it's taken a moment to do that. But just while I'm just going through my my preferences and sharing the screen there, no, I will not be able to share this until I quit. So I can't show that to you now. Sorry. But just to sort of to finish off, the one of the things that that somebody was talking about, I think it was Daniel. We were talking about a lot of this stuff is different in elementary and high school and other things. I'm teaching in middle school, and what kids are interested in middle school is other kids. They're very interested in each other, and that's where their world revolves. And so it's a constant battle to because they're going through so many changes, and it's an interesting thing, because when we first started and Ed was showing lots of pictures, he was showing them, and we found that all of these kids that are standing in line and following all the rules and things, they were little kids. My grade 7s and 8s, they can't keep their hands off each other. I can't imagine what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting. So this has all been fascinating. I have so many notes.
I'll give you a prompt along those lines really quickly. I'm
Sure.
not sure if it was the start of the unit or the whole year or a semester. It doesn't really matter. But there was a major overhaul of the Estonian math curriculum, and the 9th grade math curriculum included "Am I normal?"
Oh, nice.
You could
That's
teach.
cool.
You could do all of 9th grade math on that question,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and address the issues that you were just discussing.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also it's also an interesting point where I think that certainly, I think a lot of us would agree that we can deal with less curriculum, and that there can be rich tasks that can do more than one thing. I think that math class next year is going to be probably the easiest one to teach, just because there's so much data that you could ask some really rich questions, because there's so much that that you could do. So
Yeah. Well, okay. Unless anyone has any last final things for us to think about in the week ahead, maybe we'll wrap up for today. It's been a lot of good talk. And I think sort of reflecting for just briefly on my opening question, I'm wondering if it was just an impossible question, but I'm going to still puzzle over it and just try to look at the ways where, in addition to the things that we're all sort of pushing on to give these ongoing experiences, and dumping the got a quiz to death everything attitude, but where are we really where have we done good work with kids to help them have power as people,
Summer
and
camp.
beyond yeah, right, beyond the classroom, right? So summer camp is interesting. We should look at that, but maybe spend the week and you come back next week and we could talk some more about this, because I think that there's so many different ways that this plays out, and it turns into creative stuff, intellectual stuff, political stuff, activism work, all kinds of things, being change agents in your own neighborhood. Like that, to me, like, instead of being so great at taking tests, but like the fact that we're helping kids to feel like they are the actual agents of change in their own neighborhoods, to me is far more powerful, right? But we didn't. I don't know if we've done that work, and if we have, let's talk about it. So, Jeff's just started screen sharing. Hey, look at that.
okay, cool. This is a response to the pavilion challenge. They had to design a pavilion, and this was one of the ideas that that came from this, where this student made this lovely pavilion and then submitted a movie, and it's using SketchUp. There are others that got submitted. So it was in SketchUp, but it was also in Tinkercad and
Great.
physical models and things like that. The kids come back to this all the time. It's a nice rich problem, because I mean, what does a pavilion look like? You don't know, right? So So it's one of those lovely open-ended questions. And I get
That's
kids
great.
coming back from high school all the time saying, hey, we're doing this design project and I thought I would do it in SketchUp because I could model it. And so
That's awesome. Nice. All right. Well, it was great to see you all. And I'm sure I'll see you on Twitter. And then back again next week if you like. I'll send an invite.
Cheers.
All right. Take it easy.